Well, welcome everybody. If this is your first Interintellect Salon, really glad to have you. And if you're, I've seen a couple of you at least before, so welcome back for those of you that are uh, veterans of Interintellect. Great to have you. My name is Thomas Arnold. I'll be in the box as Interintellect host today, but again, Thomas Arnold. I am a researcher at Tufts University looking at ethical decision making in autonomous systems, human robot interaction, AI ethics, broadly construed from kind of a more philosophy and religious studies background. And uh, I just want to say we're going to try to have a picture. We usually do at Intellect, a brief picture, if you can come off camera for just a couple minutes. I know we're all going to be working in some capacities and people go on and off, but I'll ask that close to the beginning. So we're really honored and excited to have Christian Miller with us today. Professor Miller is a philosophy professor at Wake Forest University for just about 20 years. And Wake Forest, the what I think has one of the best college mascot names, and the Demon Deacons, which I actually kind of ties into some of what we'll get into, probably the mixture of the sacred and the profane and the dishonest, and how we can maybe not treat the truth as sacred. But we are thrilled to talk about Christian's book, The Honesty Crisis, and its exploration of honesty from a really multidisciplinary kind of set of perspectives. And so, as a kind of introductory question, Christian, welcome and thank you for joining us. I'd love to hear, as someone I should have mentioned that has done two really large research projects funded in part by Templeton Foundation, two really large multidisciplinary projects, one on character, which your last book on the character gap kind of treated. And then this one, the Honesty Project, feeding into this book on the honesty crisis. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of how that project fed into this, and then maybe to do the philosophical thing and start defining terms a little bit, how you see the honesty crisis, not just honesty as a virtue, but in particular the honesty crisis as what you're going after.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for coming today. Everyone hear me okay? All right, great. It's great to be with you. Thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to be here. And I try my best to make it worthwhile. Lots to discuss, lots of great issues to think about. So background on the projects, then honesty, kind of clarifying what that is, and then speaking to the honesty crisis in particular. Background on the project. So I'm a philosopher. I'm at Wake Forest University. I was working initially in the foundations of morality. Where does morality come from? Is it objective? Is it relative? What's the source of morality? I said what I wanted to say. I was looking for something new to work on, and I moved in the direction of virtue and character because I saw some really cool developments happening there that were interdisciplinary. How philosophers were reading psychologists and theologians were reading philosophers and psychologists, and all this kind of cool crossover stuff happening. The first project we did was called the Character Project, where we studied character from the perspectives of philosophy, psychology, and theology. We funded 28 researchers all over around the world in the amount of what ended up being, I think, $4 million to do new, exciting research on character. I wrote academic books. My other team members did their stuff. But at the end of that project, I thought, wow, it would be a shame to just keep it at the academic level with jargon and technicality and basically very few readers and a small audience. Let's see if we can bring this to a larger audience. And so I had no training or background in writing for a popular audience, but I gave it a shot anyway, and I ended up writing this book. I don't have with me initially, The Character Gap. It's non-technical, meant to be accessible, and distill most of our findings in a way that's, hopefully practical. and applicable. Well, after doing that, I had the same kind of reaction. I said what I wanted to say. I was looking for something to work on. I didn't want to keep repeating myself. So I said, I don't want to reinvent myself completely. What's out there in the character space that's not getting enough attention? It's getting neglected. And the first thing that came to mind was the virtue of honesty. Now, that's probably striking, like surprising. Why would honesty be neglected? And I mean, you could say it's neglected in society, and that's why I wrote a book called The Honesty Crisis. But when I say neglected early on, I meant philosophers weren't writing about it. They weren't paying attention to it. There were only 3 articles in 50 years in academic publications on honesty. That's shocking. That's like stunningly small. And so, we could talk about if you want later on why that is and why it was neglected. But I thought here's a territory that's kind of wide open. I could just explore it, say what I wanted to say, and hopefully motivate others to get in there too and tell me why I'm wrong and develop their own theory too. So that's led to the Honesty Project. Templeton helped us out 5 years, 16 research teams all over the world doing new work on honesty. Led to an academic book on honesty that I wrote. And then, guess where it's going next? I said, a lot of cool stuff here. A lot of stuff that's relevant. Wouldn't it be a shame if it was just technical and academic and relegated to the kind of dustiness of the library, metaphorically speaking, with academic work. So I said, I had such a great experience with the character gap. I want to try it again. And I wrote this book here. This is for a popular audience, non-academic, non-technical, hopefully accessible and engaging, distilling some of our findings and trying to motivate people to pay attention to this crisis and do something about it. I could say how I understand honesty. I could say what an honesty crisis is, but Thomas, is that good for
Yeah,
background?
I might follow up with you a little bit because you're just to get in a little bit about how you think of honesty. But I was just thinking at first if you could just, I mean, I think you've kind of led us there, but what you see as the defines the honesty crisis.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. So I mean that by something very specific, although it doesn't, I think, hurt to put crisis in the title of a book. It makes it like more weighty and like, we got to pay attention to this. But I wouldn't do that dishonestly. After all, it's a book on honesty. I mean, I do think that there is something like a crisis going on here and we need to pay attention to. But I do have in the back of my mind a very specific meaning. It's an honesty crisis is when, look, there might already be dishonesty in some area of society, but something's changed. And now dishonesty is more incentivized than it was before, more tempting, more appealing than it was before. And side by side with that, it's harder to detect. It's easier to get away with the dishonesty. And when you have those two features together, you've got a recipe for disaster, I think, and you have an honesty crisis. So to sum it up again, dishonesty has become more tempting because of some change that's happened. And at the same time, dishonesty has become harder to detect, so it's easier to get away with it. That's when you have an honesty crisis. And in the book, I don't really like to paint society as a whole as, experiencing an honesty crisis. I think that's just kind of too broad strokes and too thin and platitudinous. I want to pick out specific areas of society where I see this happening. So I won't expand on them yet. I'm sure we will on some of them in a moment, but just to give you the kind of highlights of the ones I hone in on, I look at 6. In the education space, AI student cheating on grade assignments. In the technology space of audio and video work, deepfake video and audio production and sharing. In the political space, political misinformation and fake news, and it's being shared over social media. In the influencer space, the celebrity and fame space, how that things like TikTok celebrity are linked to increased dishonesty. In the relationship space, how the fidelity of relationship is under pressure by things like chat rooms, Ashley Madison, pornography, but more recently, even post the book, I've been writing about AI romantic companions and how that's leading to an honesty crisis. And then the last one, which I've, in my experience, found to be the most controversial and the one that people aren't expecting and are surprised by and maybe had heard much about, is in the religious space with sermon plagiarism. So how religious leaders, it doesn't have to be sermons specifically, but religious leaders preparing messages for their audiences are increasingly using AI to craft their message, not acknowledging it, passing the work off as their own work, and thereby committing plagiarism in the process. So those are I think I got six. I'm not the best at
Yeah,
math. I'm a
that's what
philosopher.
I have. That's what I
Okay.
have.
Very
Yeah.
good. Thanks for checking. And
And
those are the ones I focus on in particular.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're going to teach it or have taught it, but it really does break down as a really amazing because the topics really are so large: celebrity, relationship infidelity, religion, like you were saying, sermon writing, and relationship of religious leadership to their following. I mean, these are specific areas. There's a lot of material to think about with honesty. So it really breaks down nicely that way. That you've throughout the book, it goes really nicely and smoothly. You're not settled into a real philosophical doldrum at any point. You've got,
Oh,
and I think that multidisciplinary approach of using the psychology literature and using these other perspectives helps as well. Before we kind of get into some of those specific areas, because there's obviously a lot of cool things to think about and what we think honesty really means. Could, I mean, I thought you did really take care and made some, interesting or maybe even counterintuitive points about things that according to your definition, would be honest or dishonest, including that, the what you believe, which I think we kind of intuit that some people are saying false things, but they genuinely believe it. But also the reason, in terms of the virtue aspect, that sometimes the reason that you are saying something about the world, I thought that was really interesting, in terms of the virtue of being honest. It's not simply about the content of what you're
mhm,
saying. Can
mhm.
you talk a
Yeah.
little bit more
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that?
Great. 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 Yeah. So, lots to say here. I'll try and be brief and please everyone. I love feedback and challenges and objections and questions. So whenever that time in our meeting comes around, please bring them to the table. Uh, I try not to be defensive at all about my views, and if I am, call me out on it. So for honesty, what is it? How am I thinking about it? I think it's natural just to have a very straightforward understanding and then wonder why we even need to ask this question. The straightforward understanding is, well, honesty is a matter of telling the truth, and dishonesty is a matter of lying. And what more is there? I mean, that's all there is. And I really want to nuance that a lot more. I think that is part of it for sure, but there are many other interesting components to the virtue of honesty. So I want to break it down to behavioral components and underlying motivational components. On the behavioral side, yeah, an honest person tells the truth. So honesty works against lying for sure, but it also works against misleading. It works against cheating. It works against stealing. It works against BSing. I think I'm allowed to say that. I didn't give the full version. Sometimes the algorithms don't like you to say the full version. Um, it works against fraud, hypocrisy, promise breaking, and other forms of action. When you think about it that way, it covers a lot of moral territory. It may be one of the most broad and encompassing virtues there is in working against those behaviors. And so on the flip side, what does it do? It promotes truth telling. It promotes an accurate portrayal of your situation. It promotes following the appropriate rules. It promotes respecting people's property. It promotes being authentic and not being hypocritical. So that's the kind of outward manifestation of the virtue of honesty. But I don't stop there because I'm like people going all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, someone who thinks that character is more than just how you present yourself to others. The heart behind the behavior matters too. You could present yourself to others in this honest seeming way and be doing it for pretty crappy reasons, technical term in philosophy. So what would be some examples? Okay. maybe let's take it down a notch in terms of abstractness. You're talking to the boss asks you a question. You respond by by telling the truth, by giving an honest answer. Um, Now, why did you do it? Well, if your reason was, I'm actually angling for the boss's position, or I'm trying to get a promotion in the company, or I'm trying not to get fired, or I don't want to feel guilty for telling a lie, um, or some rather different reasons, but you're going to see how they all fit together in a second. I want to get rewards in the afterlife, or I want to make a good impression on my colleagues. All of these reasons, I mean, lots of them, they have one thing in common. They're self-interested. They're all about benefiting myself. They're egoistic, to use the jargon. And I think that thereby they are off limits. A virtuously honest person is not motivated primarily by self-benefit. How would this behavior benefit me? Their focus is going to have to be on something larger than themselves. What could that be? I'll give you some other answers, and I think these are going to be fine. You tell the truth to the boss. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Because it's something I should do. It's because it's what an honest person would do. Because I care about other people. Because I respect the boss. Now, this next one, maybe not. Because I love the boss. Now, not in that kind of context, that's not probably applicable, but other contexts it could be. And all these reasons, what they have in common, they're focused on something larger than myself. Obligation, duty, the good of the other person, whatever it is, it's not egoistic. So when you put these two pieces together, you have a picture of an honest person. Maybe there's more to it. We can talk about, I think there'll be some other nuances too. But so we have a richer picture of behavioral manifestation plus underlying heart, both of which need to be of a virtuous kind, have to be appropriate to honesty to give us the virtue of honesty. Last word, if I could say, and then happy to go further on that. But one upshot of this, which is surprising, perhaps, is that honesty does not require the truth. Honesty requires truth telling as you see the truth, but it does not require you to actually have the truth or to be correct. That's an abstract way to put it. Here's a concrete illustration. Thousands of years ago, people could still be honest even when they believed the earth was flat. And they told other people the earth was flat. Sincerely, they told that. That doesn't detract from their honesty, yet what they were saying and believing was mistaken. The earth is round. So you don't have to have the actual truth or the objective truth, whatever you want to call it, the truth in capital T, to be an honest person. What you need to do is be authentic in representing how you see the truth. Even if, unbeknownst to you, you don't actually have the truth. It's good enough, in other words, to have an authentic presentation of the subjective truth as you see it, to meet the standards of honesty. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, really helpful. And I think that is a great basis for us to start going into these areas. And I wanted to start with education. You're an educator. And I think most folks on the call have probably seen that every other day there's something around AI detection, how to use these tools, whether it creates false accusations. Um, and as David pointed out in the chat, that there's a sense of, is tech in whatever form you want to define it, is it exacerbating both of the qualities that you say are part of a crisis, in the sense of making it, giving it an incentive and making it easier, enabling it. And I think education AI to me is just a really especially challenging one when the line between granted what you said, it's not about possession, it's about, honesty in terms of telling what you in your as fully as you can, what you take to be the truth. When the use of AI tools seems to, in some ways, confuse or blur what people think of as legitimate, or what my writing, what my words means. So I'm kind of interested in terms of how you've experienced it so far, and are there any kind of particular difficult aspects of that you think are characteristic of education and the educate
Yeah.
and teaching relationship?
Great, great, great. Yeah, thank you. And Dennis, I saw your hand earlier. If you want to put it in the chat or make sure to come back to you later, please don't forget your question. I don't want to miss it. Um, so two parts. First, the technology thread, and then educations in particular. Uh, yes, whoever made that observation, you're quite astute there. Is there anything kind of underlying these different honesty crises that can be a kind of a thread throughout them, or is it just a kind of grab bag of random things that I highlighted? And no, I think the thread underlying all of them is technology. What has changed in different ways, particular ways, AI, chat rooms, Ashley Madison, and so forth. But what has changed is technological developments, which have opened up possibilities for dishonesty that weren't as easy and as undetectable as they were before. So that's what I want to focus on, while noting that for me, I don't want to condemn technology. I'm not a Luddite in the negative connotation sense of that. I think technology is inherently neutral. It can be used for good, many, many good things. It can be used for bad, many bad things. Depends on the context and the goals and the usage of it. Okay. So in this particular honesty crisis, we're talking about education. And who's in the education space? Anyone here? So, okay, a couple of you are, so I'm sure you're a little bit. Yeah, so this is nothing new to you. You're probably wrestling with it all the time. I am, for sure. What am I wrestling with? Well, student cheating has been around forever. As long as there have been classrooms and students and grades, there's been cheating. That's nothing new. I think there was actually a first honesty crisis that happened at the turn of the century with the internet, because that enabled students to now go online, find material very quickly. It was relevant to their paper that they were working on, incorporate it into their paper, not cite the source, pass it off as their own work, and in their mind, either complete their project faster or better or both. They hoped, of course, it was both. So that was an honesty crisis right there. But at least in that case, you had certain, as a professor, tools that you could use to detect it. They weren't not infallible, but they were pretty good. Like Google, for one, to kind of go behind the student and try and track down where they might have gotten the material if you're suspicious of it. Also, it took a little bit of work on the student's part to go through these different sources and find something that's relevant and try to blend it into their paper in a way that did not look like just a crude cut and paste. Honesty Crisis 2.0 comes along. What is it? AI, of course. Because now you have something that's efficient, effective, elusive, and everyone's doing it. So efficient, more than the internet. This thing is super quick. You can take a paper that might have involved 5 hours of work and get it done in 5 minutes. So it's a very efficient use of your time. Effective. You can take a paper that you might have, if you had written it be quality, have AI do it. It's probably going to be better than what you would have done on your own, and you'll get a better grade as a result. So it's effective. Elusive. Unlike the Google thing, right now we don't have very good detectors of this stuff, and certainly nothing that's going to hold up to any kind of academic prosecution, kind of standards of reliability and detection. And then the last component is a perception that everyone else is doing it. So it'd be one thing if you knew about the technology as a student, but no one else did. But if on the flip side, if you perceive, rightly or wrongly, that everyone else in your class or most people in your class are already using this to advance their own academic interests, probably get a better grade as a result, then it's extremely hard not to follow suit, because otherwise you feel like you're going to be left behind. You put all this work into it, you get a B on a paper. These other people in the class get an A on a paper. They put very little work into it, and AI generated better paper, and they got a better grade as a result. So, because of these four factors, I think the temptation to use AI for take home graded work is extremely strong, very hard to resist. Uh, and yet, if you don't, and this will be my last point for the moment, if you don't acknowledge you're using it, when a professor has said don't use it, you're committing plagiarism. You're doing something dishonest and you're doing something morally wrong. And let me just expand on that a little bit more. So it doesn't have to be a paper. It could be a problem set. It could be coding assignments, kind of across education, going all the way back to middle school now, high school certainly, college, graduate schools confronting problems here too. Um, uh, if you have another source for your work, you incorporate that source into your work. You don't acknowledge that source, but pass the work off as if it were your own. Turn it in for some kind of, again, graded assignment. That is going to meet the definition of plagiarism. It's also going to meet the definition of dishonesty. And it's not going to be one where there's an exception, like it's okay to be dishonest in this case. It's going to be morally wrong. And so that. That is a bleak and depressing story. By the way, I hope you did expect there to be a lot of like really good uplifting stories for a book like Honesty Crisis. I hope you weren't expecting to come out of this like, boy, I'm so positive and rosy pictured view of world. But that is an especially bleak one right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's and across the book in these different areas, you also point out that um, culture and the way that institutions work, the way that incentives work, uh, that having a legal, means of prosecuting dishonesty is, maybe in some cases applicable, but in other cases, just it's really hard to imagine. So you have to think about kind of culture, what norms are, and that's where I think it's really interesting because where is the line between what teachers and institutions and educators need to do to create the friction and to honestly understand that it's way too much to expect and understand that there might be false accusations and that there's kind of a spiral that goes where a student might change their writing because they don't want to be falsely accused anymore when it was genuinely their writing. So yeah, just a lot of um, kind of folds
Yeah.
there that go on. Um,
If
I,
if I could
yeah, yeah, yeah.
piggyback on
Go
that,
ahead.
yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the cultural piece is really interesting because prior to AI, I would have said we could use cultural incentives and influences to keep cheating in check. Uh, Even with the internet, I would have said that. But now AI is a game changer and I don't say it anymore. So, what do I mean? Even with the internet, there were some strategies that had empirical backing to them to kind of promote a culture of honesty and prevent at least widespread cheating. Strategies like creating a culture of mastery as opposed to performance, where people, try to love learning for its own sake. I think I saw a really quickly comment along those lines.
Yeah.
People love learning for its own sake and try to master the material because they think it's important, as opposed to just checking boxes, getting grades, and trying to advance their career and get on to the next thing as soon as possible. Another thing, creating an honor culture with an honor code. Empirically, that is demonstrably quite effective, at least in the old days, in curbing cheating. You can do comparative studies, institutions which have an honor code, institutions which don't, and then measure things like their comparative rates of plagiarism or crib notes or whatnot. Big disparity. You can do experimental studies which bring people into the lab and compare their cheating when they have an honor code, when they don't have an honor code, and perform the same task, which gives them an opportunity to cheat. Big disparity. Um, you can emphasize things like being very clear about what the instructions are. So there's no ambiguity. Like this is allowed, this isn't allowed. You can't use the I don't know defense because we're all on the same page. We all mean by plagiarism this. We all mean acceptable. We all mean by by unacceptable this. Those are great strategies. Those are great approaches. However, I think I've gone from optimism during that time period to pessimism during our current time period because of just the moral psychological pull of efficiency, effectiveness, elusiveness, and pure cheating. It's just too strong. And so to end, I go with where most of my peers go, my peers now, not students, but academics, which is just take AI out of the hands of the students. And how you do that? Well, you bring the graded work into the classroom, either for the most part or entirely. In my intro classes, we do blue book exams, the old-fashioned blue book exams, where you write by hand. We have pop quizzes, all this kind of stuff, which used to be the old days, is coming back now. Some people do oral exams. I don't do that, but some people do. And that at least guarantees you no immediate AI problems for what it's worth. There are trade-offs, there are downsides to doing it, but at least it gets you around that problem.
Yeah, yeah. I think we'll get back around to that probably in some questions that folks have. But I did want us to get to the religion section because I do think, as you said in your introductory remarks, I do think that's quite distinctive in terms of public discourse about virtues and politics and what have you. That sermon plagiarism and maybe related uh, forms of dishonesty in religious leadership, I think is um, be interesting for folks to hear. And I would, for me, in terms of my question, is how much is that cultural dependent? I mean, I've written a sermon before, written sermons before, and I remember having a colleague at divinity school who was a Pentecostal, and he said, "You're writing your sermon? That's not basically like that's not allowed. That's not honest reception of the Holy Spirit." And it's always stuck with me of even the act of writing it down was somehow, in his mind, wasn't a pure delivery to the people listening. And I think when your discussion of sermon plagiarism is fascinating because you're really probing into that a little bit more as to what a sermon giver owes to
Yeah.
someone. So yeah, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear
good. Yeah,
more.
thanks. And again, I focus on sermons in particular. That sounds very Christian focused, which it is. But the points that I'm going to make they just generalize any kind of religious context in which there's a presentation of a message to an audience. So, yeah, this one has probably interested me the most of any of the honesty crises as well. And to start us off, I think you can actually notice a stunning parallel to the student case. So sermon plagiarism has actually been around for as long as there have been sermons. It's been around for hundreds of years. There were, times in history where kings even got involved and were mandating to their churches, look, we need some more originality in your sermons that you're using. Stop stealing them from other people. But okay, so it's been around for a while. It got ramped up with the internet, just like in the student case. Why? Well, a pastor could go online, see these videos of distinguished pastors preaching on something, or see written texts by these people who are offering their thoughts on a particular passage and incorporate it into their own sermon. They could grab an example. They could take an outline. They could adopt a particular interpretation of a passage, bring it into their own sermon. But that had downsides too, just like in the student case. Someone could listen to that and say, boy, that sounds a lot like Tim Keller or something like that. Maybe I'm going to go do a little digging and go on to Google. And lo and behold, there have been hundreds of cases where this has been tracked down in the internet age as coming from somewhere else because people in the congregation did a little digging. What's the Honesty Crisis 2.0? It's AI again. Because think about it, those points: effectiveness, efficiency, elusiveness, and the peer one, maybe not as much. So I think that it's not a perfect mapping onto the student case, but at least those first three. Sermons typically take a ton of time. I'm not pastor. I don't know. Maybe I'm over exaggerating, but from what people tell me, usually take a ton of time to prepare, and you have to do it every week. And often, like there's no flexibility. You're expected to have that thing ready to go on a Sunday, whether you've had a busy week or a relaxing week. Um, Here's a tool that'll cut your time way down. Um, Oh, and by the way, you can instruct that tool to sound like some of the greatest preachers out there, whether it's historically John Wesley or whatever, or whether it's contemporary like Tim Keller, or whoever you want it to sound like. Or if you want it to sound like a novice pastor who's just out of seminary to fool the audience into thinking that it's coming from anything sophisticated, you can do that too. You can have it introduce typos, you can have it introduce grammatical mistakes, whatever you want it to do, it'll do it for you. Um, but third thing, it's going to be a lot more evasive. It's going to be a lot harder to prove that it was actually used. It's not going to sound, you're not going to be able to Google it and have Google tell you that it was AI. So for those reasons, we're seeing a similar honesty crisis in religion. Now, how do I know that? I'll give you two survey results. One survey said that 64% of pastors are using AI in some way or other with sermon preparation. Now, that's vague. But here's the second one. 50% of pastors admitted to using it for the production of ideas and material in the sermon. That was a different survey. So this is not just, I suspect this is going on. No, there's now actual survey data that's going on. Last thought, and feel free to continue it, but last on this. What's the big deal? Well, there's no big deal if you're, from an honesty perspective, if you're forthcoming about it. If you get up there and say, I was trying to think of a good example to illustrate this principle, and so I went on to ChatGPT and it gave me this example, and here it is. Okay, you acknowledge your source. We're good from an honesty perspective. Now, whether your congregation is going to like hearing that or not, I don't know about that. They may have wanted you to go to some other renowned pastor or think of it on your own, but at least you've covered your bases. The problem here is you get up there, to illustrate this point, here's this example. You give the example and then you move on. Lo and behold, the example was supplied by AI. You never acknowledge that. Well, now we're in the plagiarism space again. You're using a source that was, independent of your own resources. You're devising, I'm sorry. You don't acknowledge the source. You put it forward instead as an example that you came up with on your own. That's going to be dishonest. And in fact, I think you're going to get, interestingly, lots of different kinds of dishonesty here. You get dishonesty towards the congregation. You're misleading them. You're getting dishonesty towards the leadership of the church, which has instructed you to, be authentic and honest in your sermon material. So you're cheating the standards that are put in place over you. You're being dishonest towards God or yourself and coming up with BS rationalizations for doing so. If you do that, I didn't have enough time, or what difference does it make? It's all in the service of the kingdom, or, so long as it helps the congregation learn this material better, so what? I think those are BS rationalizations that people often come up with to justify the behavior. Different manifestations of honesty are all being on display when you got sermon plagiarism. And so I'll stop there. I could go on for the rest of the time.
Yeah, no, I do think that these areas start to inform one another and connect in some interesting ways. We have a few different thoughts in the chat that I did want to start turning into some questions. And if folks, if I don't do this right, feel free to raise your hands. But what I'm gonna try to do is get David and John's these comments about reasons for honesty and kind of the line between reasons of self-interest, strategic reasons, when does that really start, given so much of our behavior is kind of strategic, when does it really cross the line into dishonesty if some of those strategies, like you were saying, are not just egoistic. They might have some larger group uh, aims. And I want to include John's question in this too about volunteered honesty. So your boss thinks you're doing fine. You really, don't think that and are, almost um, what someone would say is kind of overdoing honesty. Uh, how are we to, on your view, and you do say in the book, there's such a thing as like too much information, that's not the spirit of honesty. Um, yeah, if you could kind of talk to those two things, and then
Yeah,
then from there we'll
great. Thank you. Great questions. I'm sorry, I've not read all of them in the chat yet, but I see these two. So I'll take them one at a time, David, and then John, and then if either of you wants to follow up, please do so. Um, so I would not equate reasons of self-interest and reasons of strategy or strategic reasons. I would not want to say that they're the same thing. It matters what the strategy is or what the strategic reasons are. If the strategic reasons are reasons having to do with ways in which I might advance my self-interest, yeah, then okay, then we're talking about the same thing. But it seems to me conceptual that I could have strategic reasons concerned with how to rescue people who are trapped, or how to benefit people who are in need. Um, so I don't see why I couldn't have altruistic or other regarding strategic reasons. And when I do, that's clearly different from self-interested reasons and also perfectly acceptable from an honesty perspective. So I would not want to equate them. Um, Let me also note something that's not in the question, but I think really important to clarify. Just because you might be motivated by something larger than yourself doesn't mean you can't benefit. Uh, we want to distinguish between the goal and a byproduct. And this applies to every virtue. I might help someone because I care about them. And in the process, I might, or afterwards, I might get a lot of praise and maybe written up in the newspaper and so forth. That wasn't my goal. I wasn't out to get that praise. I wasn't out to get written in the newspaper, but it's a nice byproduct or side effect of my doing that action. So too, I can, in the honesty space, I can do something for larger concerns than my own self-interest, but still benefit in the process. And it's not the goal. If the goal is self-benefit, then that takes it out of virtuous honesty. So that was a brief thought there. And then John, yes, volunteered honesty. So really interesting question. And I don't have a rule. I'm someone who doesn't think ethics works best by having kind of a one rule or a 10-step rule or kind of process, which will just help us navigate every single situation. I think ethics is messy and complicated and needs to be handled on a case-by-case basis. So the way I think about this is an honest person would volunteer appropriate information to the right person in the right situation for the right reasons. That's kind of sounds platitudinous and kind of empty, but it is meant to mean something, and that there are ways in which you can fail to be honest in this respect. So, one example I like to use is you're riding in the elevator with someone at work who you barely know. And to avoid awkwardness of just like standing there while you're going up the elevator, you start up like a little chat. How's your day going? And if this person suddenly volunteers all this information, like, "Hey, I went to the bathroom 10 times. My overnight, my bank account grew by 10%. All this stuff they're volunteering. It could be truthful. They're not lying to me. Everything they say is how they see the world from their own perspective. They're not misleading me either or doing any of that, but it's just inappropriate. It's not appropriate to the kind of relationship we have and a situation we're in. Whereas, take that same person in the doctor's office, they're doing the annual physical. This person volunteers, "Hey, I went to the bathroom 10 times today." Okay, well, that is appropriate. That is something doctors should know about, and it would not be out of line at all from an honesty perspective. So it really does depend upon the contextual features of the situation, what is appropriate, what isn't appropriate. If you don't volunteer certain information, you can also be dishonest. Um, so let me now step back a little bit broader perspective. I follow Aristotle here in thinking that honesty is a mean between an excess and a deficiency. And what I've been focused on so far is the excessive honesty, volunteering too much. Um, then you're getting off into that vicious space, which is going too much in one extreme. You could also go into the other vicious space, though, by not volunteering enough information, um, by holding back too much, by being silent when you need to be speaking up and saying something. And that would be a form of dishonesty, a deficiency, as opposed to excess of honesty, which is whatever we want to call that. So we could imagine cases where uh, you know you're lots at stake for your significant other, uh, and you don't reveal something. Maybe I'm just conjuring it up on the top of my head. A kind of silly example. You see, in my case, my wife, she says, how do I look? Everything look okay before going on and giving a major presentation. I see like a sticker from the kids on her back, um, very visible. I don't say anything. That's a case where I probably should have volunteered information too, or very contextually appropriate. I didn't. I think I fail in honesty in that situation. So sorry, I was a little bit of a stream of consciousness thinking there at the end. I was kind of working it out on my own.
That's the philosophical way. So we've got some really good thoughts in the chat, but I think, we've got about 15 to 20 minutes left. And so I want to give people a chance to, if they wish, to raise their hands and ask it themselves. Because I know we've got some really good thoughts there about sincerity, mental health impact, different societal expectations. And yeah, I would be open for. I've got other questions for sure. I've got one that I'll probably save to the end. That's my closer. But for right now, if there's anyone that wants to um, raise their hand and come forward, please do. Um, yeah, John.
Hi, thank you for really interesting talk. So my question is around the mental health impact of being dishonest. So there are several times in the last few years that I've been very consciously dishonest, almost as an experiment in a way. And afterwards, I've always felt terrible.
Mm,
Not only have I felt terrible, obviously, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? Really, it's really stuck with me like glue. And I'm thinking about these incidents as we're talking right now. And this is like 2 or 3 years ago. And so I'm curious how you think about the mental health impacts of all these kind of innocuous white lies, and also kind of adjacent to that. I'm a software developer, so I see what's happened with software in the large, and so many companies are lying to customers in all sorts of little and big ways, actually. And I see the tolerance for lying over the years has just come down, and people just accept now this is part of the game. When I click this link, it doesn't really mean go to my portal, it means take another payment from my card through Stripe or something. So, and people just go, oh, well, that's just kind of the way it is. There's a kind of being worn down by this. So, just curious
mm,
what your thoughts are of
right.
the mental health impacts of all.
Good. Yeah. I Let me focus on the first one. I have a lot to say about that. And then maybe if we have time, we can get in Trey and other people, and we can circle back to the second one. So there are different features of that first question. There's uh, issues about what the consequences of lying are for me when I tell a lie or when I'm dishonest. Um, there are also issues about what might be the consequences for another person, um, and their mental health if I lie or tell the truth to them. And then also there's this question about white lies. So, you know, they are separate though. there could be mental health implications for me, but not for the audience, or vice versa. And it could be that there are implications for white lies, but also for other kinds of lies where much more is at stake. So I think we have to be a little careful keeping all these moving parts straight. So let me start with, okay, sound like the example you led off with, examples of dishonesty where it really stayed with you. Maybe this is guilt or shame. I don't want to ask you like anything personal, but in my case, I'll make it personal. Like it stuck with me for a long time. I felt really guilty, ashamed about what I did. Those tend to track larger cases of dishonesty than just white lies. For most people, telling a white lie is not going to have those kinds of implications. Certainly not of a kind of longitudinal variety. I wouldn't automatically go in a mental health direction because of those consequences, because I would sometimes say that that's an appropriate moral response as a moral agent. When we do wrong in general, it can be quite appropriate for us to feel guilty for our actions or ashamed of what we've done, or maybe sometimes a moral embarrassment. And I'm not saying in all cases, but in some cases that can be a quite healthy response that could, in the future, foster better behavior and character development. Not always, to be sure. Now, and then of course we also know of individuals who don't feel those kinds of reactions, and in some cases we call them psychopaths. Because for them, doing moral wrongdoing, even acknowledged moral wrongdoing, has no negative moral implications, no negative moral emotional responses in their minds. And that's not a good way to be. So I'm not saying in all cases when people don't feel guilty or ashamed, but some cases, that's not a good way to be. Now, let me expand a little bit more on the white lies, and then let's go to Trey and then Jenny and Mark. So on the white lie in particular, lots of people these days feel comfortable. It seems like they feel comfortable with white lies. They don't seem to experience much of these kind of negative mental health or emotional consequences. What do we make of that? I'm someone who is much more cautionary about white lies than many other people tend to be. I don't want to say that they're outright wrong in all cases. Indeed, let's tie it back to mental health. There could be cases where telling a white lie might be the recommended course of action because the person is really in a precarious mental state, the person who you're talking to now. You know that, and so they ask you something that's rather innocuous, like, how do I look today, or how did this dessert taste? But you know that they're really, hanging on by a thread. And if you come out and say, boy, you don't look so great today, or it's really tasting not so good, it could send them over the edge. In that kind of case, that might be advisable to tell a white lie. But lots of the kind of routine white lies of our lives, I would recommend more caution than we seem to have. Let me give you an example I use. This is fictional. My wife's a great chef, but suppose she made this dessert. She's trying out for the first time. She asks me how it tastes. I say, oh yeah, it was great. Secretly, I didn't like it at all. But I'm now trying to exhibit another virtue of compassion alongside honesty and protect her feelings. So I tell her, yeah, it was great. Now, that's not the end of the story, because often there are going to be further ramifications that can make this problematic. For example, I said it was great. She'll probably make it again. So I have to eat it again and again and again and again. I'm setting myself up for not such great long-term experiences. I said it was great. The kids have to eat it too now. Similar things for them. I said it was great. She makes it for the party. Others might not think so well of, it's a very trivial example, but you can see how this could magnify. Not think so great of her cooking. I have to remember the next time I eat it to give the same kind of enthusiastic response that I give the first time. And then the third time, and the fourth time, and the fifth time. And if I slip up to the kids and let them in on my secret and they rat me out, I gotta be careful around them. And last thing, despite all that, my hard work that I have to put into this, she finds out, she could feel like we've broken trust. Like, you've been lying to me about this for all these years. how do I know you haven't lied to me about other things too? How can I trust you about more important things when you were lying to me about this little thing? So caution, I think, is recommended in many white lie cases more so than other people think. Sorry, that was a lot to say. Trey, do you want to? Thank you, John. And Trey, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks for being here, first off. But I was thinking more, I was thinking about George Santos, the fabulous congressman who lied about literally everything, which is obviously a bad example, but like what are action steps we should take, or maybe on a regular basis, habitual or whatnot, in verifying what people say,
Uh,
with the trust. And then also when we have the repeated, maybe it's white lies, maybe it gets more substantial. Like, how do we judge the line? And and I'm really trying to come from that question in like the real world action steps. So it's not totally
mhm,
academic, I guess, if that made
yeah.
any sense.
Yeah. So how do we judge the lie? Um, to clarify the last point, how do we judge lie when we have determined that it is a lie? Like how do we know how to judge it? What kind of severity to assign to it? How bad is it? Um, yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, that was it. And also, I was just thinking in politics, like how much effort should, we make in that in judging someone's bio because you can't verify
Yeah.
a lot of things, but when five, six, seven things are like, this just doesn't add up.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good. There's lots to say here, and I probably can't say it all right now, but here a couple thoughts right off the bat. Um, in the second chapter of the book, I talk about some research that actually I find encouraging. It's not all negative. It's not completely crisis level. And one of the areas of research I find encouraging is on the truth telling frequency side of things. Uh, Contrary to what you might have thought, most people tell the truth most of the time. And this is backed up by empirical research. For example, in one study, they found that out of 1,000 participants, 60% never told a lie in 24 hours, in the past 24 hours. And most of the rest of the participants only told, maybe at most one lie, very few lies. But it was a 5% outlier group. It's kind of like your Santos example. That was the frequent liar group. And so they skewed the overall average to be like 2 to 3 lies as an average because they were telling so many. So they skewed the overall picture. This has given rise to a position called truth default theory, which says that most people default to telling the truth. That's what's naturally what we do most of the time. And the flip side of that is we assume that most people are telling the truth to us as well, most of the time. And that's great. I mean, think about it. If there weren't the case, society would really grind to a halt. But it's great that, when I'm lost in a kind of foreign city, I can reasonably trust the directions people give me. When I'm meeting a person for the first time, I can reasonably trust that they're telling me their actual name most of the time. So I think we're safe most of the time. However, as you noted, there are these outliers, and if we are in a relationship with them, they can do a lot of harm. They can just continue repeatedly confabulate with us and deceive us and take advantage of us, and they have no qualms about it. So, there are questions, as you said, like how do we pick them out, and what's the severity of their lies, and how many lies should we record from them before we just cut off relationship with them or think that they're really dishonest. And it's hard for me to give any kind of simplistic algorithm or recipe here, right? I think the stakes matter for sure. When we're talking higher stakes topics, there's more incentive to try and verify what they say than on lower stakes topics. So, if it's just casual stuff we're talking about, you might be suspicious, but do you really need a fact check? Maybe not. If it's more significant stuff, whether it's a politician who might be representing me, or someone in my work life where we're going to have to work together a lot, uh, there it might be worth the investments to do a little bit of fact checking. Um, Last thought, and I'm sorry, going a lot long a time. I got more questions here, but yeah, I would. The frequency also matters a lot. So, is catching a person in one lie enough to just kind of undermine the relationship? Typically not. I would caution against that. On my view, most of us are not virtuous people. We're not great. We're going to slip up. We're going to commit lies. If you're holding people to the standard of perfect honesty, you're not going to have any friends, right? Or be in any relationships. So what you really want to look for is a kind of systematic pattern of that lying over time. It's going to be hard to determine that pattern for casual acquaintances. But for the people who are invested in your life, who are kind of richly present in your life, if they tell a lie one time, okay, forgiveness might be warranted. They tell a lie repeatedly, a same lie or different lies, and you start to pick up on this pattern, then that undermines trust. It's hard to see how the relationship could survive then. The one exception to what I just said, though, is when it comes to severity of the lie. Or more generally, the dishonesty, because I think we can all imagine situations where it's so severe that there's no going back as far as the health of the relationship, at least without a lot of time to reestablish trust and a lot of time of healing. I'm thinking of the kind of brazen act of infidelity, the kind of identity fraud, like I pretended to be someone else with you for 20 years. And really, this is not my name. This is not where I came from. This is not the job I actually have. And so like the heart of our relationship is built on dishonesty. I find that out, we're done for a while at least. Okay, sorry. I have trouble giving short answers.
That's all right. Jenny and Mark, I'd love you
Yeah.
to get your question in.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I had a question about your definition of honesty as truth
Yeah.
telling as you see it, as opposed to like having to be correct. And what I wonder is it or is it not part of honesty to like want to have the truth and question that you might be mistaken, or is that like a different virtue? Like is truth telling as you see it, is that different from sincerity? Is honesty different than just sincerity? Because a person could be like really sincere, but also kind of not want to know if there's another truth out there that they're not seeing, like kind of like motivated reasoning to think they have the truth, but they're still kind of being
Yeah.
honest.
Good. I'm not, in all honesty, which, I like to make that pun all the time. I haven't thought much about sincerity specifically, so I may have to, you feel free to email me afterwards and we could carry on more over email if you like. But on the wanting the truth. So my claim was only about having the truth, like actually possessing the truth. That's not necessary for honesty. You're nicely highlighting a different dimension, which is whether you have the truth or not, is wanting to have the truth, a constitutive element of honesty. And there I'm inclined to say that it is, but give you a little bit of a philosophy weaselly answer, which is to say that there are different kinds of honesty. There's moral honesty, like in our interpersonal interaction with other people, and then there's intellectual honesty, when we're engaging in intellectual pursuits aimed at what? The truth, knowledge, understanding, wisdom, justification, rationality, these kinds of more intellectual goods that we're seeking out in our research lives. In order to be an intellectually honest person, yeah, I think that you desire to acquire and preserve the truth. It's hard for me to imagine someone who didn't have that desire, who we want to say was intellectually honest. So I am going to say that. So big tent honesty, which is going to include moral honesty, intellectual honesty, maybe include other things too. One component of that is going to be a desire to acquire the truth. So great question. Uh,
That is a great question. And in the chat, we've mentioned that parenting is a probably a whole other book about the ramifications of honesty and I know you have a parental commitment that you want to fulfill. So I want us to be able to wrap up in a couple minutes. I did have a question around the honesty versus compassion. I think your example was really good in terms of playing that out. Uh, I was thinking about we're having this in America, societal wide debate about COVID and different theories, and what did someone believe, what did they not, what needed to be said, what didn't. And if we had time, I'd want to go in more into that. But in closing, just thank you so much, and I would love to take anything from that you've had so far, because I know you've done a good amount of interviews so far. Is there anything that has stood out or surprised you about how people took your treatment of honesty?
Yeah. So several things there. First of all, he's alluding to the fact that I have to go pick up my son from school. So I have to head out the door around 3:15. So just to be honest about that, what was he referring to? That's it. Secondly, I didn't have a chance to look at all the comments. I don't know if there's a way to keep the log of comments, and I'd love to look at them later.
I'll save the chat and send
Yeah,
them.
I
Sure.
appreciate that. Thirdly, feel free to email me. I'll just put it in the chat so you don't have to even look it up. That's my email address. If I didn't get it to one of your questions, or you wanted to follow up more, or you prefer that format to this format. So, and then on to the final two. So my wife is texting me and making sure I'm getting our son. On the final two things, compassion and then things that have been surprising. Um, the compassion thing, I want to say honesty is different from compassion. And one way to really vividly illustrate that, although they can also overlap, of course, too. I don't want to say they're completely different. They can have lots of overlap. One way to illustrate that, it goes back to the heart behind your actions. I think you can have compassionate motives for telling the truth to someone. So that's right there, a concrete illustration of how they could be intertwined with each other. Why do I not lie to my kids? Because I care about them. Why do I not mislead them? Why do I not BS them or be hypocritical? I mean, sometimes I am, frankly, I'm not perfect. I don't claim to be, but I try not to be. Why? Because I care about them. That's different than another answer I could give, which is because it's my duty, or it's because I'm required to by morality. That also would be a perfectly fine, honest answer under the virtue of honesty. That's not compassion, though. Compassion has to be interpersonal, focused on the good or at least perceived good of the other person. Duty is abstract and impersonal. It's a different kind of motivation. On the surprising stuff, I have been surprised by a couple of things. One, how receptive people have been to the material. I've gotten very little pushback. But I don't know, maybe people don't want to be honest with me. But usually I get more pushback than I have gotten here. So that's been really encouraging. Two, how interested people have been and wanted to talk about it. Just, conversations have gone on for hours and hours. Podcast on Monday, which was scheduled for an hour, and I only noted to him after we'd gone for 2 hours that maybe we should think about wrapping it up. It's just like there's so much good stuff to talk about, so much that's relevant and important. And then three, how people want to go into so many different directions with this. It's unpredictable where people want to go, and I have to be ready to go and whatever they want to go. I've had conversations revolving almost entirely around the sexual side of all this. What if you have kind of fantasies in your mind and you're married or in a serious relationship? Is that dishonest? Is viewing pornography online, is that really dishonest if you're in a committed relationship? I've had people who want to go entirely into the religious stuff, entirely into the education stuff, entirely into the political stuff. We didn't even touch the political stuff. But I wanted to talk, and what about, as you said, COVID? What about election denial? What about immigration? So all this stuff, yeah, I think to wrap it up, illustrates why honesty is so important to talk about because it touches so many areas of our lives. It's not just some like academic game of playing. It's not some compartmentalized little corner of our world. It's so through and through integrated into our lives. So
Wow.
that's been, I didn't appreciate that as much as I do now.
Yeah, well, that's great, and I encourage everyone, especially with these questions, to go out and get the book. It's a great book, really captivating, intriguing, and carefully thought out as well. So, Christian, we really appreciate the time, and thanks to all of you for such wonderful thoughts and participating. We'll follow up with the chat, and yeah, let's. Keep thinking about it and keep doing our best, I guess. So thanks so much, you all, and we'll see you at the next salon.
Thank you
Take
so much.
care.
Nice
Thanks.
to meet you all.